Hey there folks, it's Matthew Seville here with SLRlounge.com. I've got another weekly edit episode for you, and today we're going to look at this image here, which is a portrait that I snapped of a bride and groom during the cocktail hour. And as you can see, I used a 9-stop neutral density filter to blur the guests who are walking around, and yet the couple is holding perfectly still. Let me hit L here to go out of the lightbox mode, or whatever L stands for. And we can see it's a 15-second exposure at f10 and ISO 100 on my D5300 with the Tokina 11:16. This is my favorite setup for wide-angle shots lately. And if I zoom way in, you can see this couple is holding perfectly still, which no human being can do for 15 seconds straight. So how did I do this? Of course, I cheated. And I merged this image here, which was an 1/80th of a second exposure, where I took off that 9-stop neutral density filter, and then I put on the 9-stop neutral density filter, and I created this exposure here. So I merged those two images in Photoshop to create this final edit. So it turned out pretty cool, but there's a handful of small things that I wanted to go over. And so, for example, neither this image nor this image look like the final image here. And that's because I did some additional editing to this PSD file. Let's start with this image in its unedited form, which looks like this. I'm going to go into the SLR Lounge preset system to edit all of these original raw files, and then I'm going to merge them in Photoshop once I've given these a little bit of a base foundation of editing. And since this is clearly an HDR type image with skin tones in it, what I'm going to use, of course, is the base soft presets, and I'm going to go straight to the HDR Max preset, and it has skin desaturation built in, compared to the vivid landscape presets that will kind of overcook skin tones if you use them in this situation. And it looks pretty good right out of the box. Obviously, I'm going to have to merge another exposure for the sky here, but we'll get to that in a second. Right now, all I need to do to this image is maybe warm it up. I'm going to hold down Shift and hit my up arrow to increase the temperature. Let's go all the way to 6,550. And then let's maybe just darken it a tiny bit to kind of bring these tones down. Remember, all I need for this frame here is this couple, the sharpness of this area from her dress, their skin tones and everything. Everything else is going to come from that other image, which is here. Here's the unedited version of this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Previous to apply the same exact adjustments. So you can see, let's filter the yellow images here so you can see the unedited originals. You can see that that 9-stop neutral density filter definitely has some funky color cast going on. But other than that, the tones look pretty similar. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to crank up the tint a little bit somewhere around here until it approximately matches. And that looks good to me. Let's go to this last image here, which is just an image exposure exposed for the sky. I'm going to try hitting Previous, but since this is a completely opposite end of the HDR, I'm going to have to bring up the shadows and highlights and kind of bring those back into a manageable area. Usually my goal for just an exposure that is just the sky is to completely boost the shadows so that they come close to matching this type of scene, and then I just adjust the highlights until they are not blown out. So maybe what that's going to mean is that I have to crank this way, way up. Let's try something crazy, plus 1.5, and then let's go down with the highlights. See, here we go. Now I can use this exposure and blend it relatively easily with this one, and yet this one has the weird blown out sky and this one doesn't. So it looks like we're ready to go. I've got these foundational images processed. What I don't want to do yet is do any burning and dodging or special effects like vignetting or black and white or anything before I create the PSD of all these different layers, because then if I change my mind later about vignetting or anything, I would have to go back to the drawing board and re-blend all of these layers. So let's just select all of them and take them into Photoshop by hitting Control E on my PC or Command E on my Mac. And here the images come into Photoshop. I'm going to open all three of them. What I should have done is set open to layers in Lightroom. That would have been a little bit faster, but I can make up for that by just hitting Control A, Control C, Control W, No, I don't need to save this. Control V to paste that on. And then let's get this one other, Control A, Control C, Control W. No, I don't need to save that as a PSD. I only need one PSD. All right, here we go. I've got these layers. I'm going to mask each of these layers. We have other tutorials on how to do layer blending, but I don't really want to focus on that in this tutorial because this tutorial is all about what to do in Lightroom when you're working with these types of RAW and PSD files. So let's put the sky layer on top and let's merge it in here. I'm going to hit Control I to hide this layer, and then I'm going to hit B to brush these in. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger with my right bracket. And then I'm just going to paint that sky in. I'm going to do not a sloppy job, but a quick job, I guess, and kind of get in here with some of the other areas just a little bit. Oh, I seem to have masked his face into nothingness a little bit. I'm going to hit X and erase that part there just so that nothing is ghosting. And there we go. That layer is blended in quite nicely. If I hit the layer visibility, you can see there's a little bit of misalignment maybe. If I zoom in and I hide and reveal, you can see I need to hit V and I need to align this layer by using my arrow keys to kind of move the layer around. There, that looks like it's lined up a little bit better. Okay, let's go to this other layer really quick and just kind of blend this in. Again, I'm going to hit Control I to invert that layer mask. I'm going to hit B, and then I'm going to just brush in the couple. Oh, I don't need to hit invert mask again. I'm going to brush them in just like this. And here we go. Just masking around this layer to kind of bring them into the scene here. I'm going to have to, it looks like I'm going to have to use a different layer altogether because behind them when they were blurring, the water here is going to be a dead giveaway because the water is not blurring in this frame. So I might have to go and grab a fourth layer to kind of blend in right here. But you can get the general idea of how I would do this kind of a job. I would, you know, kind of mask it a little bit here and there, hitting the X key to go back and forth. Let's hit X again and kind of mask in some more of these areas, just a little bit more fine detail. For example, when I'm doing a fine edge, let me zoom way in here and let me hit X. When I'm doing a very close edge, what I do is I just make my brush smaller and smaller, and I come right up to the edge here like this. Now, obviously, you don't want to sit here and watch me do this for every single inch of their entire outline. So I'm just going to hit Control S and save that and then go back to Lightroom here so that we can see what it would look like when all is said and done. Let's filter the green images here and the yellow images so that you can see what this final image looks like. And as you can tell, I did find another frame that has the water blur looking good right here. So let's hit reset on this one so you can see what the original unedited version looks like. Oh, it looks like there was a little bit of a crop too applied here. That's another thing you don't want to do before you merge images, is you want to leave them completely uncropped because, like I said, you never know when you might change your mind about a PSD file and you don't want to have to go back to the drawing board. That's why you want to do your presets and your foundation edits to the raw photos, but then save all of your final editing, such as cropping, burning and dodging, and stylized editing, until after you've got this PSD file back in Lightroom. For example, what I want to do to this image is hit it with a little bit of a vignette, maybe a medium or a light. Usually I don't use a medium or a heavy vignette, but because this is done with this blur, motion blur, people might expect it to be a little bit vignetted. Maybe I'll use the medium vignette, but then I'll bump up the exposure just a little bit to kind of compensate. And it looks like I might want to just warm it up a tiny bit. I'm going to hit this up. That's looking good. I do need to do a little bit of burning and dodging. And let's see about doing maybe... Oh, what happened to my burn and dodge actions here? My presets for burning and dodging are missing a little bit. Usually I have a -0.5 preset, and that's what I want to use on this area right here. It's a bit of a hot spot, so I'm going to burn and dodge that. I'm also going to kind of burn and dodge a little bit just for fun around the edges and kind of give it just a little bit more of a moody look to the image overall. I might just burn and dodge the sky down altogether like that. I'm going to hit enter and double down on this. It's one of my favorite techniques to kind of quickly get things where I want them to be instead of fiddling with individual brushes or one brush for everything. I like to just use multiple brushes really quickly. And this is looking pretty good to me. I'm going to hit enter. Maybe I'll bump up the contrast a little bit, which might require me to also boost up my shadows a little bit and retain a little bit more highlights. Nah, not too much. Honestly, I'm pretty happy with this right here like that. So let's call this good, and let's make a few virtual copies so that you can see how I might quickly go about creating a couple other versions of this. I want to do one black and white version. So let's do maybe a light crush black and white. Oh, that looks really cool, but you know what I need to do is I need to adjust the black and white toning because this black and white conversion has kind of made their skin tones a little dark. So we have a SLR Lounge preset that does this by default. It kind of helps out. It's in the saturation here. We're going to go B&W warm boost, maybe medium or heavy. If I scroll down here, you can see this black and white conversion is boosting the warm tones, and maybe I could modify it to drop the cool tones a little bit and kind of get that deep sky going, but I don't want to do that for this particular image. I'll leave it right there. And that's good. It does look like I need to do a little bit more burning and dodging here. I'm going to hit a -1 brush and just go over this a little bit. Maybe that -1 was too much. I'll throttle it back a little bit. Somewhere around there so that it doesn't distract from the couple. I might hit enter and then do a little bit of a brightening on them just to kind of top it off, and that looks great. Let's try this other image here and do a vintage fade. And again, I'm working in the base soft presets because this is a portrait, and we could try a neutral fade or a filmic color fade. I kind of like this. I may want to warm it up a little bit, so I'm going to go into the warm curves and do some sort of neutral punch for something like that, or a neutral fade for something like that. I like this neutral wash warm cross and the crimson. These ones always tend to do a pretty good job here. Maybe I could do it brightly, get a bright wash going on, or let's try a dark wash. We really could go any way with this. I'm going to use a neutral wash, try amber or apricot or crimson. I like the apricot. I'm going to hit enter to close the filters here. Brushes. I'm going to lower the contrast back down. And I think the presets undid my vignetting. So let's go back to the vignetting and let's reapply the radial medium vignette. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, there you have it, folks. Here's the normal version. Here's the warm vintage looking version. Here's a good black and white looking version. And this is all built on top of the foundation of the PSD that if I hit reset, you can see still has a lot better detail and everything, so that I could, if I want to come back to this later and redo it, I don't need to redo all of my work. So there you have it, folks. That's how I would manage this whole process using both Lightroom and Photoshop, a little bit of Photoshop, with the main focus being on doing the special effects and the heavy lifting with Lightroom. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in our next video. Take care.